Live from the SABC's Auckland Park studios, welcome to this week's first edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvoko. Now, exactly a month from today, on the 10th of February, to be exact, President Cyril Ramaphosa will once again stand in front of the nation, outlining what his government thinks should be the nation's priorities in 2022. How the process usually works is, at the beginning of each year, the SABC's the ANC's National Executive Committee, gathers ahead of the party's January 8th birthday celebrations. The ANC NEC has a brainstorming session out of which they come up with their mission statement for the year. And that's what exactly happened last week in Polokwane. The sitting ANC president then, together with his team of policy advisors and speechwriters, take the statement, fashion it in their principal's language and style, and then he gets to read it on the day of the birthday celebrations. And that's what happened on Saturday in Polokwane, Limpopo. This coming week, the ANC leadership will meet again at Lekgotla to craft a program that will subsequently be taken to Cabinet, and following Cabinet's own Lekgotla, the President and his government team this time put together the State of the Nation address. And so, a month from today, on the 10th of February, President Cyril Ramaphosa will then stand in front of all of us, outlining what his government thinks should be the nation's priorities this year. And this year's State of the Nation address, scheduled to take place on the 10th of February at the City Hall in Cape Town, the chosen venue for this year's address following that fire that broke out last week and destroyed Parliament. So, on the show tonight, we look at whether, from the set of priorities outlined on Saturday, South Africa is as foremost in the ANC's mind, and the party is not more preoccupied with its wranglings and forthcoming elective conferences. The Watchdog starts now. Zwelinze Mavavi, SAFTU's General Secretary, and Khangi Matabane, the Executive Director of the Black Business Councils, are my first guests. They form the first panel to look at what transpired on Saturday, and of course, what people have been talking about since then, what their take is on that address delivered by President Ramaphosa on Saturday, and of course, whether from their respective vantage points, they think that the ANC's hearts and minds are at the right place, where they should be, where the nation's priorities, or what this nation deserves, is more important and foremost in their minds. Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming through, for agreeing to talk to us this evening. I'm going to ask each one of you what for you, stood out from that address on Saturday. Khangi?
Evening, Vuyo and the viewers, Mr. Vavi. For me and for us is if for example I was the one who was delivering the address, I would have first looked at the statement, the problem statement that the country is facing, and then for us, the biggest challenge that we're facing as a country is unemployment, inequality, and poverty. And we were, for example, we were sitting with 10 million young people basically sitting at home doing nothing. And out of those 10 million, 3 million of them have got higher education qualifications. So some of them will have degrees, some of them will have diplomas. And they're sitting at home and doing nothing. We've got 35% unemployment rate. So if it was for us, we would have started there and say, since we've got this crisis, you'll recall in July we had riots that are mainly related to the very same crisis. We'll have then said, what are the solutions for us as a country to deal with this unemployment, 75% youth unemployment? And then for us, that is what we call the biggest threat to our democracy. It's a ticking time bomb. So any solution that does not seek to address this is not going to go any further. It's not going to assist us as a country. And for me, I think the statement was actually short of this, because one of the achievements that the president indicated was that there are 10 million young people who are receiving the 350, which for me is not sustainable. We cannot sustain the country on almost developing a country that is dependent on grants. And what we need to do, for me, grants are needed, we agree, but what we need to focus on and put all our minds on it, just like we did when the advent of COVID happened, is to support entrepreneurship and support entrepreneurs, because those are the people who will be able to create jobs.
So, Lenze Mavavi?
With my own background, as you will appreciate, I was General Secretary of COSATU, in fact, the longest serving one in history, having been the Deputy General Secretary before that. And what is striking me about this year's January 8, similar to the previous few years, is a lack of innovation on the part of the leadership of the ANC. Secondly, lack of appreciation of the scale of the crisis they are facing as an organization. And in this sense, if you were to look at the local government election as the single measure, and this trend has been continuing since 1989, actually 70% of the country's population passed a vote of no confidence, not just to the ANC, but to all of the political organizations in our country. There's a growing big chorus of the overwhelming majority of our people who are asking a fundamental question: who is representing us? And that is no longer the ANC. It's no longer any other political party. So I agree with the Black Business Council that actually that on its own represents the biggest political threat to the democracy of our country, to its stability. If you combine that, which is another third area of an ANC refusing to accept the scale of the crisis that South Africa is facing. If you look at the crisis of unemployment, with 77% of young people between the age of 15 and 24 now unemployed, with Black people now having unemployment hovering around 50%, with two provinces with unemployment rate at 55%, and Black women unemployment above 50% for the first time. Any organization facing that crisis, you would have read from the January 8 statement that we are actually facing a crisis that we've never faced before. And this crisis, let's face it, yes, it is worsened by the coronavirus pandemic, but it is a crisis that has been worsening since 1994. And let's be honest, unemployment today is worse than it was a crisis during apartheid. And I know that we started to count officially the numbers of unemployed post-1994 to include all people of this country, including those that were trapped in the Bantu stands. But these rates of unemployment amongst the youth, the black people, the black women, and the levels of poverty and inequalities that have made us to hold those three titles. We are the country with worst unemployment amongst industrializing economies. We're the country with the worst youth unemployment in the whole world. We are the country with the worst inequalities in the whole world. And unfortunately, those have become even deeper, worse during the rule of the ANC. Now, if you were to face that level of crisis, you will see from the January 8 statement that this is an organization that is serious about a renewal. And this is an organization that have made a deeper assessment as to why 70% of the population suddenly have no interest in the electoral systems, in the political systems of the country. They rather chose to go play football during elections day. And I can't see this, Vuyo, not in this statement. So if you were to ask me, what will you be expecting in the president's keynote address or the State of the Nation address in February, I will say I will hear the same old rhetoric repackaged to sound new, no innovation, in denial, and totally out of place, totally far removed from the crisis that the country is facing. And that will be just packaged in a better English to sound like something is being done, whereas the crisis is worsening.
Well, let's take a listen to what he had to say around how we can deal with poverty and unemployment.
In the end, the economic recovery process has to be embarked upon by all social partners. It is not only the task of the ANC, nor the task of Labour, or the task of government. It is the task of all of us to build the social compact. Such a social compact must set out the obligations and commitments of all social partners: government, business, labor, and community, to decisively address our common national challenges of poverty and unemployment.
Kangi, it's not the government's responsibility alone. It is the responsibility of government, business, civil society, labor. What has been happening at NEDLAC? Because you would have thought that these conversations are at a very advanced stage. Every social partner knows exactly what needs to be done next. Why are we not there?
Yes, let's take one example, and which was agreed at NEDLAC during the economic recovery process. The one example being to pay small businesses in 30 days. Business did commit, and we were sticking to that. We were paying people within 30 days. But unfortunately, government is not coming to the party. And we've raised this many times with the president and other ministers to say, why can't the president just say to all government ministers and say, in the next 6 months, I want you to have paid all outstanding invoices and then give me a report every month on the progress. And that is not forthcoming. And then this is one of the things that are encouraging corruption, because then what happens when people don't get paid on time, the administrators in finance and procurement, they then approach companies and say, no, I can speed up or help you to process your invoice, but give me 5% or give me 10%. That encourages corruption. And then small businesses are very scared to even report this type of instances because they think they're going to be blacklisted. So for me, this is one example that we needed specifics from government to say.
In fact, you can
instruct everyone to do the right thing on time.
You can count, several others. If you look at tourism, for example, here's an industry with a great deal of potential. We know that, COVID-19 hit that industry particularly hard. But even before COVID-19 hit, none of the reforms, or few of the reforms that are supposed to really get that industry to do better were actually implemented. If you watched news reports yesterday and today, the spectrum issue is far from being dealt with. There's a lot of infighting, one party taking another party to court. And in both industries, there were these structural reforms that were supposed to have been implemented, which should turn the fortunes of our economy around. Zwelin Zimavavi, you're not part of the NEDLEC setup. We won't get into the reasons and everything that has been happening there. But as an outsider looking in, where do you think the problem lies? Why is it so difficult, if not impossible, for these social partners that the president referred to in that clip? Why aren't they finding one another? Why aren't they, delivering on the things that they have promised to deliver on and actually agreed on, as Hanki was saying, citing one example of the payment of small business enterprises?
Let me rather go back to my theme about lack of innovative thinking there, Vuyo, to make this very point that the president is raising in the cut that we have just played, and the point that is being raised by my comrade there in the Black Business Council. I'm saying that there is no innovation anymore. There is no capacity to think. The organization itself has been totally hollowed. It has no capacity as an organization. It has no capacity in the state because the state has been hollowed itself. There's nothing left there. And this is an example. The idea of a social compact predates the LTP, which was adopted in 2011. That idea that we must have a social compact has been running almost simultaneously with GEAR, the adoption of GEAR by the government in 1996. For all of these 20 years, every leader that have come have simply repeated that rhetoric, turned it around, repackaged the language, only to say the same thing. There was a crisis of the world economy in 1997, the Asian flu. There was a crisis in 2008. Lots of economists say, actually the biggest economic crisis ever experienced by humankind, bigger than even the 1928 world crisis that led to the First War. There's now a crisis of the pandemic, and which have led to the killing or to the death of 95,000 people officially. But we know that if we were to count all of these unofficial statistics from the Medical Research Council, you're sitting with 275,000 people that have died. In each of those instances, the government response has been, let's have a social compact. Eventually, they package something, which is absolutely nothing new from NEDLEC, and they say, here is it, we do have something that we can now call a social compact. But when you read it, it is still exactly the same neoliberal approaches to economic development that is not going to address the type of things that you're speaking about, the fundamental structural problems that are facing this economy. What are these structural problems that we're speaking about? Because we're not saying the same thing as the mainstream economy are saying when they talk about structural problem. Our structural problem is that this economy remains a postcast of neo-colonial activity in the African continent. It remains a place where the superpowers of the world are using this country as the base to extract mineral resources, to beneficiate them in their countries, and to bring those mineral resources back to South Africa as finished products. And in the meantime, South Africa is losing out in creating jobs, secondary industry jobs. It is unable to build or rebuild, rather, its manufacturing base, or is deindustrializing to the point that we now have our manufacturing only contributing around 12% to the GDP, when it used to contribute more than 22% to the GDP. This social compact that is coming from Nedley is not even addressing that as a structural problem. It's not addressing the fact that as we speak more and more concessions to big business, they are sitting on 1.4 trillion rands of investable cash in their back pocket. And thanks to the monetary policies, again, another structural problem, thanks to the monetary policies of this country, they are able to rake a 4% profit by just lying next to their swimming pool and doing no activity in this economy. Just putting their money in the banks, they can rake those 4% profit levels. That's structural. If you do not address those structural problems and you keep on just repeating what we have said in 1997, crisis 2008, now 2021, 2020, you're not going to get yourself out by just repeating and repackaging it with better English. No, the problem is structural. The ANC NEC statement is not addressing the fundamental problems that this economy is facing. As a result, unfortunately, the more they speak good English that is being appreciated in New York, the more the youth is losing the hope, and the closer we get into the point of a powder keg in the country.
Well, let's hear what the president had to say around the economy, and both of you gentlemen, you can tell me if it at least begins to address the concerns you've been raising, or whether it's better English that will appeal to people in New York.
Our economy has been severely damaged. Millions are without work, and today, more than ever before, rely on social support for survival. The rate of economic recovery, while better than anticipated, has not been sufficient, and the resources that are needed to address the challenges of poverty, unemployment, and inequality have largely been inadequate. At the same time, our experience of the pandemic has highlighted the sense of social solidarity, more critically, the need for all South Africans to join hands in a social compact to revive the economy and improve the quality of life of especially the poor in our country.
Well, as economists were telling us last week, at the end of last week, even if we do achieve the 2.5% economic growth, down from the 5% that was forecast earlier, that is not going to change our lives much. And the record high unemployment levels are going to stay, Hanki.
You're absolutely correct, because if you read the statement this year and you read the statement last year and the previous years, the the statements are full of promises, but there's no time where the president comes and say, out of the things that I promised last year, this is what I've achieved. So last year we spoke about creating 1 million jobs. But now we don't start from there. We need to start from there and say, out of the 1 million jobs, how many did we create? And then how many did the economy lose? We all know what happened with COVID, but there are decisions that I think needs to be taken that are not taken. For example, we spoke about localization. If we want to create jobs in South Africa, we really need to support localization. We not only by talking about localization, we should actually start doing things that are bringing localization here. There are things that are sort of relatively easy to do. For example, we consume the highest HIV medication in the world. Why can't we produce the medication in South Africa? Those are the things that we need to talk about. For example, we also, the president speaks about some of the measures. For example, we had the 200 billion loan guarantee scheme that we said is not working because the way it was designed, it was not designed with the small business in mind. And then we know all over the world that if we want to reinvigorate the economy and then create jobs, we are not going to expect big business to create jobs. It should be small businesses, black-owned businesses, women-owned businesses. For example, you spoke about tourism, the one man or one woman lodge there that is going to create employment. So where are the measures to support that? Where are the financial measures to support it? Because we need to at least say this is the amount of money that we need to pump into the economy. We need to support these small businesses. We need to fund them so that they can create jobs. And as I said, government is not going to be able to create jobs. Government's job is to create a conducive environment. And that's what we need from government. Rather than saying we're going to create jobs, because that's not the job of government. The employment is going to be created by businesses. So we need to change our focus from the focus now of saying we're providing grants all the time, because that money then we cannot recover. And then take half of that money at least that we're providing grants with, and then support businesses. There are so many small businesses and black businesses around who are looking for funding. Because once they get that funding, they'll be able to create the jobs that we need. That for me is what we're supposed to be focusing on, rather than focusing on giving everyone grants.
So, Lindsay Mavavi, you have the advantage among the three of us here. You are the only one who has the experience of at least being part of at least some of the processes I described right at the beginning, where the ANC NEC meets, and then you have the January 8 celebrations, where the ANC president gets to read a statement of the ANC National Executive, and from there the ANC gets to have its lekgotla, where they thresh out the issues that the January 8 statement would have raised. That then, gets to go to the cabinet lekgotla, which then informs the State of the Nation address. I'm wondering whether, in the past, where a situation like the one we are seeing now, the one both of you and Khangi have just described, when the ANC then realizes that it has fallen short of the expectations, right? Has there ever been instances where the ANC says, actually, we may or we missed the point in our analysis of the situation, and so our January 8 statement wasn't really, what it could have been? At this particular point, when they then go to the lekgotla and later to the cabinet lekgotla, has there ever been space where they are able to say, let's change focus, let's then look at, how we can do better than we did in our January 8 statement?
No, look, the January 8th statement is the most important speech in the life of the ANC. I mean, this year they were celebrating the 60th anniversary or the 50th anniversary when it was first delivered by O.R. Tambo in 1972. And so if you miss it there, if there is no vision, no innovative thinking, and there is denialism about the extent of the crisis, and there will be no responses that are adequate. I mean, for anybody to get a cure at the upstairs, you have to think, you have to acknowledge that I'm sick. And when I'm sick, I must find a way of curing whatever the disease that I have. The ANC is not yet acknowledging the extent to which it is so compromised by its own failures. For example, let's look at the very last point that the president was raising. I'm not going to comment about the visuals. The visuals tells a story. January 8, fine, in the context of a social distancing. But that was not social distancing. That was massive stay away by the youth and the workers in the main, which used to be the driving force in all of the previous January 8. And numbers of the youth flooding the stadium, the workers flooding, because they were excited to what O.R. Tambo and other leaders of the ANC will call on them to do. Now, the ANC is going very, very shallow. On the issue of unemployment because it knows it cannot afford to go back to pre-1994. The crisis of poverty, unemployment, and inequalities is not an issue of 2021 related to Corona. This is a crisis of colonialism, capitalism, and apartheid combined. The three monsters that destroyed the lives of ordinary black people in our country.
Okay.
When you have nothing to offer and you cannot account for what you yourself have promised that you're going to do since 1994, you're going to have to speak as if the world starts now. The world starts with Corona. It doesn't start with the 1994 effort to build a better life centered around the need to build employment opportunities for black people, for the black working class. That's the crisis. When you do not acknowledge that you have failed and all of your instruments since 1994 have dismally failed black people, the working class, the youth, the women, then there's no possibility that you're going to spin something out of the Lekgotla or out of the cabinet Lekgotla in order to be delivered in the State of the Nation address. That's the crisis the ANC is facing.
Okay, and that's where we're going to leave it. Special thanks to both of you, gentlemen, Khangi Matawane, who's the General Secretary of the Black Business Council, and Zwelinzima Vavi, who is the General Secretary of the South African Federation of Trade Unions, giving their respective organizations take on the speech outlined, read on Saturday by ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa. That speech, of course, going to inform the Lekgotla that the ANC is going to have, which will subsequently inform the cabinet Lekgotla that later on President Cyril Ramaphosa are going to have, which then builds all the way into the State of the Nation address. Up next, Lebohang Pegu, who is a political economist for the Trade Collective, as well as Asanda Ngwasheng, who is a political analyst, give us their take on that Saturday State of the Nation address by ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa. Welcome back. If you've just joined us, exactly a month from today, on the 10th of February, to be exact. President Cyril Ramaphosa will once again stand in front of the nation, outlining what his government thinks should be the nation's priorities in 2022. Now, this year's State of the Nation address, scheduled to take place on the 10th of February at the Cape Town City Hall, the chosen venue for this year's address following the fire that broke out last week and destroyed Parliament. And the question we are asking our guests today is whether that address that the ANC president delivered on Saturday ticked the kinds of boxes that should matter to South Africans. South Africans looking forward to hearing what President Cyril Ramaphosa will have on that during that State of the Nation address, and whether, in fact, he will be speaking to their issues and their concerns. My guests for this segment are Asanda Ngwasheng and Lebohang Peku. Good evening to both of you. Thanks very much for your time this evening. Just what you made overall of the speech, Asanda, that the ANC president delivered on Saturday?
I think, it was a speech filled with many promises. Most of the promises are promises that we've heard before. And what was most surprising to me was the pronouncements that the ANC doesn't have corruption, when we know that, the ANC has corruption, and the president himself had said, when they were talking about the state capture report, that they are willing to try and do something about corruption. So a little bit of contradiction there around the issue of corruption. But also, I think that the ANC is tired. It's a political party that has been in government for almost 30 years and has been singing the same song for almost 30 years and has consistently failed to deliver on most of the promises that it's made. Now, of course, I'm not saying that the ANC hasn't delivered anything, because I know people will be coming at me for that one, but they have consistently failed to deliver on one of the most important things, which is jobs, and delivering an economy that works for the 55 million plus South Africans, and that delivers jobs for the 12 million plus people who are still sitting and have been sitting for many years without jobs. And this is, what people wanted to hear, of course, that the ANC is planning to deliver jobs, but this is a promise they've heard before. And I don't know personally what is different, what is new that the ANC plans to do. And I was quite interested by the fact that, you've gotten a statement that apparently was gone over up to, I think, 15 times or something like that, in order for it to be a full representation of what the NEC thinks. You've got a large number of NEC members who themselves are, have a finger pointed at them in the state capture report. And it's going to be interesting to see how the ANC navigates the fact that it is now officially, and has been for a while, its biggest enemy. And the fact that we as a country are now being held hostage by a political party of 1.4 million people in a country of 55 million plus. And that is, I think, the question that South Africans need to ask themselves, that do we still need this political party? Is there any hope of this political party ever delivering on any of the promises that it's made, that it keeps making? And also, I think most importantly is that the way the ANC has consistently had this infighting for almost 10 years now, more than 10 years, there's been infighting. And this infighting has cost South Africans at every turn, whether you think about July, and what happened in July, the violence we saw in KZN and Johannesburg, or you think about, the fire in Parliament, which they've all alluded to it being part of this RET fight versus the New Dawn, the, attacks on the Constitutional Court, and all kinds of things that keep happening, and seemingly we are made to believe they are coincidences, but they all are attacks on our Chapter 9 institutions and are attacks on the very, anchors or tenets of our democracy. And my question is, if we were to get rid of the ANC, what harm would South Africa get to if the ANC is the actual problem at this point in time? The ANC is the biggest problem that this country has. And I think that part of the solution for South Africans would be to get rid of it, because it's not going to be able to self-correct. Okay. It doesn't matter how many times they try to tell us that.
Lebohang?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think for me, the January 8th statement, it resuscitated a few things. The one is the social compact that the President Ramaphosa spoke of last, I think, at NASREC, when he was becoming the party president, again, and consolidating his role there. And I think that at the time, there was a 10-point plan, which was very much in the vein of something that Roosevelt would have created in the wake of the Great Depression. And of course, the context was this was redeeming the so-called 10 lost years and so forth. And the last we then heard of it after that was in the context of a social compact in relation to, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. So interesting that it resuscitates here again in the January 8th statement, but really with not much meat on it. So it's really a bit of it's trying to, I think, appease different stakeholders and different societal pressures. And remember that there is a lot of pressure at the moment to be seen to be a country, a movement that is able to be relevant, that is able to be sustainable, and that is able to sustain and move forward with the context of the Zondo Commission and so forth. And the other thing, of course, is that what does a social compact mean in the context of a country which at the moment, of course, has seen several quarters of negative growth, of degrowth, and of course, lack of employment has already been mentioned. But beyond that, the trust deficit, which can be, which has been really, I suppose the melting pot of that has been the Zondo Commission, but the many other commissions and the somewhat lax functionality of state institutions. I think to add to that is that it's always important to remember that there is an interface between the State of the Nation address and the January 8th statement. But the January 8th statement is the state of the party, not of the nation. And one of the comments I've been making over the many years that I've been analyzing this is that there often seems to be a confluence between the state of the party and the state of the nation. And what we see in the state of the party here is an attempt to somehow make pronouncements on international relations, on climate change, on anti-corruption, of course, on employment, and different elements which even speak to what's going on the African continent, our positionality, our international diplomacy, and our diplomatic footprint. And I'm not sure whether or not the state of the party address is the place for all of that. One would actually think that some of these comments and some of these policy positionings and peggings would be more fitting as a nation, as a state of a nation address, where the state needs to position itself in the context of climate change, in the context of patriarchy, in the context of some of the other social disorder and some of the social disequilibrium, rather than the party. And I found that slightly disorientating.
But don't you think, South Africans have every reason to expect the ANC's January 8th statement to, at the very least, do both? And more, speak more to the nation than to itself. And I'm raising this on just for two reasons. One, the ANC keeps reminding us or telling us that it is the leader of society. Number one. And secondly, it is responsible for what has been happening in our country over the past 27 years, which is why, for instance, a person like me finds it difficult to understand it when it uses language like, we urge government to publish the critical skills list. This is when now they're talking about whether it's xenophobia or people who come into the country illegally. This is where I find difficulty with their language when they talk about the very social compact you are talking about, because they say such a social compact must set out the obligations and commitment of all social partners. Why aren't these things happening? If you say we must seize the advantage of our democratic dividend and opportunities, who are you asking to do that? Because you are the one who's supposed to take a lead. Then it probably means that we should do away with or at least, punch the necessary holes in the narrative that says, one, they're a leader of government society, and two, that the January 8th statement is what sets the pace and the tone, and the fundamentals for the State of the Nation later?
If I may, I think the problem with that, Vuyo and my co-panelist, is basically that remember that the context of the January 8th statement was, in fact, a party that was addressing itself. It was addressing itself in exile. It was trying to set a praxis and the compass of how things were. It was a morale booster. It was also often addressed. It was addressed by people who were living external to a South African context, to people who were both within and outside a South African context. And I think that we'll never get away, in my view, from the idea that, in fact, the ANC, the January 8th statement, is the ANC speaking to itself, and we are merely eavesdropping on that conversation. Now it's become a de facto rehearsal to the State of the Nation address, but we must forget that it is in fact an address to the party, not to the nation. We are merely eavesdroppers, as it were. And I think the other part of that, I mean, as you rightly say, Vuyo, when the government says things like we call on social partners, I think that it is a bit foolhardy to say that for the ANC to say that they are the leader of society, the leader of communities. Otherwise, that means that even things like the constructions like the Tripartite Alliance are rendered slightly redundant, and that has been an argument that many of us have had for many years. That what is actually the value and the character of this tripartite alliance, but among many other alliances. Now, if the idea of a government that then says that they're not just a leader of communities and of society, but also a ruling party. There are too many, very strange linguistic and conceptual confusions, which make it very difficult to then pin down whether this is a government that is governing. And I think, again, for many years, quite a few of us have been saying, are we governing or are we ruling? Because rulership is really something that is quite absolute. It doesn't call for much consensus building. It doesn't call for much community building. It actually suggests that, in fact, it's a top-down, hierarchical, very hegemonic form of rulership, of governance, rather than governing with, thinking with, conceptualizing with, and co-creating the kind of society and community that we would want to have. And I suppose one of the difficulties over the years has been that the ANC itself seems unclear as to which it wants to be. And I mean, that's always been, I think, a dilemma, and that's going to remain a dilemma, I think, certainly through the next election, and until they themselves decide whether or not they are willing to self-correct, willing, in fact, to do things differently, and willing to place community interests at the helm of their own operations rather than their own self-preservation, because that in and of itself speaks to the kind of identity dilemmas that they're going through. A movement that seems to be much more interested in its own survival rather than in the survival of the society at large, in the survival of the electoral mandate, in the survival even of the trust of the people who voted for them, who, in fact, of course, as we know, are diminishing fairly rapidly.
Okay. I'm keen to know your thoughts on this very same question, Asanda. I mean, the January 8th statement versus State of the Nation address. The eavesdroppers, Lebohang says we are.
I mean, I think that, Lebohang is obviously correct that, one is a political party statement speaking to its members who currently number at about 1.4 million plus. And the other is meant to be a conversation with the nation. But as you've rightfully pointed out, that line was blurred a long time ago, and it has become, a rehearsal for SONA, or the State of the Nation. But I think that, one of the things that, while obviously separation of powers is very important, and the separation between party and state is very important, we also need to not be in denial, or we need to be kind of awake to the fact that at this current point in time, the line between the political party known as the African National Congress and South Africa is almost, and the state is almost non-existent. And this is seen from the fact that we are currently sitting with an ongoing, seeming, sabotage at every single opportunity, whether you're talking about things like the Parliament fire, or you're talking about the president having the lights switched off through a fault, as the ANC calls it, while he's speaking at such an important occasion, or the many other myriad of kind of, incidents that I can mention. They show us and they tell us that there has been such a big conflation between state and party. Hence, I keep going back to saying, for me, the most important conversation is, do we still need the ANC as a country? Is this political party that is currently governing delivering on its mandate? Is it still the political party that can take South Africa to where it needs to be? And do we not need to be thinking about a new political party, a new path and a new way in order to save our country? Because as Lebogang has rightfully pointed out, the ANC is so self-obsessed and is doing such navel-gazing that they don't actually care about the destruction of some of the most important institutions of our government, whether you're talking about, some of the things that were revealed at the Zondo Commission and the State Capture Report, or you are talking about the very acts of treason, as far as I'm concerned, that we have seen since July and probably even before that, but we were not paying enough attention. And the question remains that, are we going to be held hostage as a country of 55 million plus by a political party of 1.4 million? And I keep repeating this because I think it's important for us to be able to have the numbers to understand just how small a political party the ANC's fully paid up membership is compared to the rest of the citizens. Because Cyril Ramaphosa, yes, is the leader of the African National Congress, but Cyril Ramaphosa is also the leader of South Africa. And one of the things he should be trying to do with the state of the nation, if we want to look a little bit ahead to that, is he should be trying to bring us into his confidence and be trying to give us some hope that something, somewhere, somehow, is going to change.
Okay.
But at this point, I have very little hope that anything is going to change or that he's going to be able to deliver anything when he sits with, many members who are who have fingers directly pointed at them as per the Zondo Commission report.
Okay, you've said, your last words are exactly what I was going to ask you next. We've run out of time and the team is going to kill me, but I've got to ask you to say something along those lines as well, Lebogang. Are we going to get a better or worse year, given the fact that the ANC is going to an elective conference in December this year, and in the run-up to that elective conference, you're going to have all these regional, provincial conferences that always have a bearing on how the ANC conducts itself and, of course, how we get to be affected by all of that. 10 seconds. Is it going to get better or worse from where you sit?
More of the same. I think more of the same autopilot, more of the same lip service around anti-corruption, around self-renewal, self-correction, and I suppose a desperate bid to deal with credentials leading up to the ANC conference, which no doubt all of us will have our eyes on. And I suppose the other thing will be how then that leads into the state of the budget speeches, the SONA. I think everything now between now and 20 is going to be the road to 2024 and the desperate bid for survival in one way or the other. But I don't think that there are going to be any bold moves. There might be one or two symbolic arrests, that kind of thing, to show, one or two red herrings to show that the government is tough on corruption. But I think it will be just more of the same, slightly murky autopilot that we've been quite accustomed to, unfortunately, over the last couple of years as South Africans.
And
we're used to it now.
And that's where we're going to leave it. Thanks to both of you for coming on the program this evening, Asanda Ngwasheng and Lebogang Phekwa. And that was our program for this evening. Do join us again tomorrow evening, 8 p.m. sharp. Good night.